Well, now we're going to move on to a new segment for this season, and that is Conspiracy Corner. I just came up with that. We'll just call Conspiracy
so
Moment.
Good. Conspiracy Corner.
There was I used to listen to a Bachelorette podcast recapping the TV show, and there was a guy on. He was a bachelor at the time for the show, and his name was Clayton. And so the podcast would always be like, "It's Clayton's Corner," and they would always do like a little moment about Clayton and all the weird things he was doing. So this is Conspiracy Corner.
I love it.
So we're going to take turns each week presenting each other with a question about like a conspiracy theory, and then present the case for the claim. I'm not going to try and debunk the claim. I'm just going to present to you why people believe this to be so.
Okay.
And then I'm going to ask you at the end what you think.
Okay, let's hear it.
All right. Drum roll, please. The claim is NASA faked the 1969 Apollo 11 moon landing.
I knew it.
Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin did not walk on the moon, and the subsequent missions to the moon were also staged. So not only that, but the other missions. NASA did this in order to win the Cold War space race and to beat Russia to the moon. So my question is, do you think the Apollo 11 moon landing was faked?
Over the years, I've had this question a couple times.
Okay.
So this is probably one of the only ones I'm familiar with. I think the first one probably was.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
But you think the subsequent ones weren't?
I think it could be real now. I think we've gotten enough technological advancement to actually make it there.
Great.
That's my personal opinion.
Okay.
All right. Now you can present your case.
All right. Here is the case for the claim. So right after the Apollo 11 astronauts, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, they were the two astronauts who walked on the moon. One small step for mankind, or something like that. I forget.
One big step for alien kind.
Everybody. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Okay. We weren't alive back then. When they returned to the Earth in 1969, some individuals questioned the achievement solely due to the audacity that did we really just have somebody walk on the moon? Because from the time that the first astronaut went to space, and that was a Soviet astronaut named Yuri Gagarin. So from the first time he went to space and orbited the Earth to when Neil Armstrong was walking on the moon was just over 8 years. So many people were like, that seems like a short time span that we finally got somebody up to space. And then just 8 years later, somebody's walking around on the moon and sticking the American flag on it. Yeah. So this seemed a little bit too crazy for some people to believe. And another reason why some people doubted it was because of the Cold War context that was going on right then. It was just kind of an arms race in between like the Soviet Union, the USSR, and the US to who is going to develop nuclear weapons, other things like that. And the Cold War space race was a part of that. And that was a technological and ideological competition between the U.S. and the Soviet Union to see who could achieve supremacy in space exploration. So the Soviets got a satellite into space first, and then they got an astronaut into space shortly afterwards. So that was Yuri. And then the Americans all of a sudden got up to space and got Neil Armstrong walking on the moon just 8 years later. So because of that, people doubted just the quickness, and maybe we just wanted to like seem cool to the rest of the world. But regardless of doubts that the moon landing was faked, it was mostly scattered doubts rather than like a worldwide, we're not sure. So it wasn't like a theory. And radio shows and newspapers would occasionally speculate about the footage that they brought back from the moon landing, but there was no like narrative of like what was faked or how that all happened. What really brought this conspiracy into the forefront was in 1974, so 5 years after the moon landing. A book was published entitled "We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 Billion Swindle" by Bill Kaysing. That sounds like such a clickbait title for a book.
Bill Kaysing.
Yeah. So Kaysing, he was the writer, and he had some light connections with NASA contractors and scientists. And he argued that the landings were staged in a studio. And his reason was that was the photographic inconsistencies in the photos they brought back from space. And then he claimed that NASA just did not have the technology to do so. And his book is widely considered to be the first to formalize this narrative that it was all a hoax. So I wanted to go over some of his claims, which you might be familiar with some of them. So if you are, shout it out.
Right on.
His first claim was that scientists that he had worked with in the past or around the time of the Apollo 11 launch had expressed doubts about the ability to return a crew from the moon. They weren't so much worried about getting somebody to the moon, but like getting them back off the moon into the spaceship and back home. And they didn't know about things like atmospheric radiation and rocket engines being reliable. So first of all, he was like, they just don't have the technology to do this. So he proposed that the moon landings were filmed in a studio, possibly at Area 51, using Hollywood techniques like special lightings and special effects. And he speculated that the director Stanley Kubrick was involved because Kubrick worked on the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Wow.
So he's like, this guy knows how to like make it look like you're on the moon or in space.
Stanley Kubrick?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So he's like, Stanley Kubrick was in Area 51 and faked this whole moon
This is
landing
like a
thing.
clue guess.
Yes, it is. So Casein, the author of this book, claimed that the astronauts were sent into a low Earth orbit or kept in a secret place in Las Vegas, either one, while the moon set was filmed in Nevada, in Area 51. Kubrick also claimed that the lack of seeing any stars in the background of the film landing pictures, so that Neil Armstrong's there, he's planted the flag, he's walking around the moon, that he's like, there's no stars. And so he argued they should be visible. There's no air on the moon and there's no clouds. So he was like, these are just like a mishap in staging in a studio. They didn't think to put stars in the background. He also claimed that there should be a significant like blast crater or dust cloud beneath where the lunar module landed due to the rocket engines when the astronauts left and landed on the moon. He's like, there's no crater where they landed. There's no dust disturbance in the photos. So staged landing. In the photos of the landing, there was also what Casein believes to be non-parallel shadows. So shadows not lining up with the direction of where the sun was, kind of going different directions. So he's like, it's multiple light sources. It's in a studio rather than it just being one shadow from the sun. And he also thought that some different objects appeared to be lit from multiple angles. He also argued that the astronauts, Neil and Buzz, when they returned to Earth, did not seem sufficiently excited enough to have actually been on the moon.
Okay, that one I'm just
He thought that maybe they felt guilty or embarrassed for lying. So he thought they just weren't excited enough.
Okay, I don't know about that, but the rest of them, okay.
Yeah, so those were his claims, and there was much more. It was a very big book.
All right.
So the early 70s also were ripe for distrust in the U.S. government because the Vietnam was going on during then. A Vietnam War was going on during that time. The Watergate scandal had just happened, and there was lots of conspiracies about the U.S.'s government influence in the Vietnam War starting or the U.S.'s involvement. So there was already some good reason for people to distrust the U.S. government at that time. And so his book was published at a perfect time where audiences were already questioning the government lying to them. And so maybe this is it.
Wow.
So by the late 1970s, the moon landing hoax really became a staple of conspiracy culture. But it mostly remained kind of like a niche thought unless you had read the book. It wasn't something that many people believed on until more recently. It has really come into a resurgence through the help of social media and the internet. More people being able to talk about it, analyze the photos, dig into it. So social media platforms like TikTok and X have seen a spike in moon landing conspiracy content. There's many popular TikTok videos that question the Apollo landings that have garnered millions of views and thousands of likes. So it seems to be a growing conspiracy among the younger generations. They often point to claims like, how is the American flag waving? It's in the pictures. There's no wind on the moon, right?
Yeah.
And there's also no stars in the background. So those are two main ones that these TikToks have gone viral for. And another thought of why there's been kind of a rise in this being a conspiracy theory is that no other country has ever had astronauts walk on the moon. And do you know when the last American walked on the moon?
When was that?
1972, just 3 years after Neil Armstrong. So this isn't something that's happened in over 50 years.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, maybe they just kind of faked it a couple times 50 plus years ago.
Wow,
so we haven't been back to the moon in 50 years.
It's just strange.
Yeah.
Very strange.
Yeah. Recent polls have found that 57% of Russian respondents doubt that the landings were real. So Russians really don't believe it, which might make sense.
They have
it's
a
like,
good reason
oh no,
not
you
to
beat us
want
to the moon.
Yeah.
About 25% of Europeans believe it was faked, and about 10 to 12% of Americans think it was faked.
Okay.
This is double the amount of people who thought it was faked from 20 years ago. So in the year 2000, maybe 6% of Americans thought it was faked, and now it's 12. So that just shows the rise. And the majority of people who think it's faked are, teenagers to people in their 30s. Yeah. So with all of that information,
Wow.
I'll ask you again, do you think the Apollo 11 moon landing was faked?
That's a lot of information. So last time we went, just to clarify, last time anyone went to the moon was in the 70s.
Yep, 72, just 3 years after.
And no one from any other different country has been up there.
Yeah. So there was just 12 Americans that ever set foot on the moon, and it was within like a 4-year time span, 50 plus years ago.
Okay. And, here's what I'm thinking. I do believe the moon landings are fake.
Okay.
Especially if the second one was just a couple years after the first one.
Yeah. The last one, they did it a couple times, but yeah.
Yes. So my reasons being, a lot of the photos and stuff are and video is so different and higher quality than I think we could have produced back then.
Yes.
Especially since we've had land rovers on the moon and on different planets since then. And that quality of that footage isn't even, it's good now, but like 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it probably wasn't even as good as the moon landing footage that we had.
That's so true, because there's a documentary, I think it's called Oppy, Oppy, about the
Mars rover.
That went to
so
Mars.
good.
And I don't think that those videos were as clear.
It was, and it was okay. It was okay video, but it was...
Of course, it was Mars, but still.
It was Mars, but like you said, still, that video quality was not that great. But back then, they somehow got this amazing video quality of some people being on the moon in the 60s and late 60s and early 70s. So that's why I believe it's not fake. Now, I do believe it's possible today. 100%.
Yes.
Reason being, and people are going to disagree with this because it's somebody that's highly disliked right now. Reason being, Elon Musk is trying to send people to Mars.
To live on it.
Yes. But not only that, he's sending... They've already successfully sent rovers to Mars to land and rovers to the moon to land. Now, I can't see that being a huge hoax.
Right.
Because they're putting so much money and time into it.
Yeah.
Unless that is also a conspiracy.
Right.
So I think that it's possible today. I don't think the moon landings actually happened back then.
Okay, so I kind of changed your mind just by showing one side of the facts.
You did, because I thought that we had landed on the moon in the 90s or
did too.
early 2000s.
I thought this was something that we had done recently.
Yeah.
So when you brought that up, I'm like, just wait till you hear the last moon landing was 53 years ago.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah.
Very cool. What do you think?
I think there's lots of reasons for it to be fake just because of the whole Cold War space race kind of a situation.
Definitely.
I think that's a really good one. I don't know if maybe it's like, oh, America made it to the moon. There's no reason for other countries to try and do it. Could be. But yeah, I think there's enough inconsistencies with like the photos. And also for me, I'm like, how is it that we went from the Wright brothers having their first little like 30-second flight to 65 years later, Neil Armstrong is walking on the moon and you can hear him talking.
Yeah.
That's kind of crazy.
That is super crazy.
So yeah, I'm not going to stake my whole, career on it, but I do think there is it's a valid conspiracy theory.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot of validity for people who believe it's faked. And yeah, I think that maybe it wasn't real.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Same boat.
I don't know.
Nice. Well, this is to all those like dads out there who would be like, we can put a man on the moon, but we can't make a lawnmower or like you can't make a water heater that works, Eat your heart out, Dad, because
maybe we didn't put a man on the moon after all.
You're okay because we're not that technologically advanced.
I love it. But I do think your point that Elon Musk is pretty confident that we could have people living on Mars in the next 20, 30, 40 years. That's what would give me pause to be like, okay. I mean, of course, it's not like he's a government official that would know the secrets of if people actually went to the moon, but that means there's the capabilities, at least now, like you said, to get there.
To at least get on the moon, if not Mars, we'll at least get to the moon.
Yeah. But my biggest thing when researching all this was like, I had no idea that nobody else had gone back to the moon.
I thought other countries had been to the moon.
Me too. Yeah.
Wow.
Just 12 Americans walked on the moon in like a 4-year period of time.
That's not real. The more you say it, I'm like, that's just not real.
Right?
There's no way.
Very nice.
Wow.
Cool. So that's my conspiracy.